More than 1,000 years ago, from the cold and rugged lands of Scandinavia, a new force began to emerge. They were sailors, warriors, explorers, and when their ships appeared on the horizon, entire villages trembled in fear. The world would come to know them as the Vikings, a seafaring people whose voyages and conquests would reshape the history of Europe. The Viking Age began around the year 793 AD, and its beginning is often linked to a single shocking event. On the northeast coast of England stood a quiet monastery called Lindisfarne. It was a place of prayer and scholarship, isolated from the chaos of the outside world. But on one fateful morning, monks looked toward the sea and saw something approaching. Long, narrow ships moving quickly through the water. At first, no one understood the danger, but within moments, armed warriors stormed the shore. The attackers moved with terrifying speed. They carried axes, swords, and shields. The monks were defenseless. The monastery was looted. Precious artifacts were stolen. Sacred books were destroyed, and many of the monks were killed. News of the attack spread rapidly across Europe. For many Christians, it felt like a sign of divine punishment. A terrifying new enemy had appeared from the northern seas. But the Vikings were more than simple raiders. They were also extraordinary sailors. Their ships were technological marvels for their time. The famous Viking longships were fast, flexible, and incredibly efficient. They could cross vast oceans, but they could also travel deep inland through rivers. This allowed Viking warriors to strike where enemies least expected. They could appear suddenly along a coastline, launch a raid, and disappear just as quickly. Soon, Viking ships began appearing across Europe, along the coasts of England, across the rivers of France, deep into the heart of Eastern Europe, and even as far south as the Mediterranean Sea. Their reach was astonishing. Entire kingdoms struggled to defend themselves against the sudden and unpredictable Viking attacks. Yet not all Vikings came to raid. Many came to trade, and many came to settle. Over time, Viking communities began to form far from Scandinavia. They established settlements in Iceland, later in Greenland, and Viking traders built networks that connected Europe, the Middle East, and Asia. In fact, Viking merchants traveled enormous distances along rivers in Eastern Europe, trading silver, furs, and valuable goods. Some of these routes eventually reached the great city of Constantinople. The Vikings were also explorers, driven by curiosity and the search for new lands. Around the year 1000 AD, a Norse explorer named Leif Erikson sailed west across the Atlantic Ocean. His journey led him to the shores of North America, nearly 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus. Archaeological evidence suggests that Vikings briefly established a settlement in a place known today as Vinland, likely located in modern-day Canada. Although the settlement did not last long, it proved that the Vikings had reached the New World centuries before other Europeans. Despite their reputation as brutal warriors, Viking society was far more complex than many imagine. They had systems of law. Communities gathered in assemblies called things, where disputes were settled and decisions were made collectively. Viking culture was also rich in storytelling and mythology. Their beliefs were filled with powerful gods such as Odin, the god of wisdom and war, and Thor, the thunder god, who wielded a mighty hammer. These stories shaped their identity and worldview.
Over time, however, the Viking Age began to fade. European kingdoms grew stronger and more organized, defensive systems improved, and many Viking groups gradually settled into the lands they had once raided. They adopted new customs, converted to Christianity, and became integrated into the societies of medieval Europe. By the 11th century, the era of large-scale Viking raids had largely come to an end. But the legacy of the Vikings did not disappear. Their voyages expanded trade routes across continents. Their settlements helped shape the development of several European regions, and their stories became legends that continue to fascinate people around the world. Today, the image of the Viking warrior remains powerful, a symbol of courage, exploration, and relentless determination. From the cold northern seas came a people who would sail farther than anyone before them, and whose influence would echo through history for centuries.